Welcome to another episode of Mr. Plumb's Thoughts. Today I wanted to talk about an artifact that a lot of people, there have been lots of debates on, and it's the Shroud of Turin. Now some say it's the actual burial cloth of Jesus Christ. Others say it's a medieval um, fabrication or fake, right? And everyone's got their opinions. You've got scientists who've chimed in, historians, skeptics and believers alike. Everyone's got that opinion, and so honestly, it's definitely worth digging into because it teaches us a lot about how we handle faith and evidence. Uh, so let's start with, what is the shroud? Just a quick background on it. It's a long piece of linen cloth, about 14 feet by 3.5 feet. And it's got a faint image of what is claimed to be a crucified man. People have done some analyses on it and pointed out various imprints and marks that do suggest, whoever this shroud was wrapped in was most likely crucified. And tradition says that Jesus was wrapped in a cloth, so it would make sense that if you had such a cloth, you would see the imprint on both sides. And of course, they say this imprint happened when he was resurrected. That whatever the mechanics were of that, it created some sort of a radiance or a light that um, that put this image on the cloth. And so it's kind of interesting to even think about that idea in the first place. But realistically or historically, I guess I should say, the first time this cloth shows up is in the mid 1300s in France. Later, it gets moved to Turin, Italy, and it's remained there to this day. But before the 1300s, there's really no clear mention of it. You have a handful of texts that people like to try to point to try to claim that it's related, and these texts do mention say a sacred cloth and whatnot, but I've investigated those. I haven't really found any of them to show a clear link. And so you have so this shroud, it doesn't have any kind of record with it of whose hands it's passed through. Really, it just shows up in the 1300s, and there's really been no reason for people to not believe that it was the burial cloth of Christ. This entire time, it really does look like a crucified man. Anybody who looks at it can see those details. And so a lot of people built their faith around it, and they found that it, was confirmation to them that Jesus Christ was real. And while I think that's awesome that people have come to Christ over this, to me, I'm reminded that Christ can make all things work toward good, whether they were made for nefarious purposes or not. And I think this is one of those examples where Christ has found a way to use this for his purposes. Now, here's where it gets pretty interesting. So in 1988, there were 3 independent labs in Oxford, Zurich, and Arizona, and they all ran radiocarbon dating on a corner of the cloth. And all 3 got the same result, where they basically said that this cloth was created in between the 13th and the 14th centuries AD, which places it squarely in the Middle Ages. And that matches the historical record. So for a lot of people, the radiocarbon dating was sufficient for them to say that this cloth was a forgery. But a lot of people don't want to accept that. So cognitive dissonance kicks in. This is the idea where, you have a deeply held belief about something and you come face to face with another idea that contradicts it. And most people, it creates it creates an uncomfortable feeling inside, right? And so we call that cognitive dissonance. And what most people do with cognitive dissonance is they will search out reasons or create reasons, fabricate reasons to make it so that their deeply held belief doesn't have to change. So, people who didn't want to think that this cloth was, or sorry, people that did want to think that this cloth was authentic, they developed a new theory. The theory was that maybe these labs tested a corner of the cloth that had been repaired in the Middle Ages, and that the labs accidentally tested this, repaired patch instead of the original. But let's be real. Three independent labs, all world class, all know what they're doing, and they would have known how to look over this cloth and find the best piece to radiocarbon date. And to think that all three were supposedly fooled by a repaired patch, I think that's a stretch. And these people clearly knew what they were doing. And outside of some grand conspiracy or, grand scheme to deceive the world, which I don't even know why you would want to over something like this, I think that three independent labs all confirming the same date is pretty strong evidence. In fact, this is how Jesus Christ establishes the truth in a matter. He says, by the mouth of two or three witnesses shall every word be confirmed. So unless it was some elaborate hoax, I think that those three labs are pretty solid. Nonetheless, the theories persisted that, maybe it was a patch. So then in 2024 now, just last year, there was a new study that came out that got a whole bunch of people excited. Everyone has been jumping up and down. And it was done by researchers in Italy, where they used a technique called, can't remember what it was called. The initials were WAXS, wide angle X-ray something. I can't remember the last word off the top of my head. You can look it up though. But basically, in simple terms, what they did is they shot X-rays through the linen and looked at how the crystals inside had degraded. So linen fibers over time they lose their order as they age. It's just part of their decay process. So you can look at these and you can compare them to other known cloths or cloths that are allegedly from the same time period, and you can look at the fibers and compare them. And so these researchers, they concluded that the fibers that they looked at were about 2,000 years old. So case closed, right? Now we've got two different things. We've got one saying medieval. We got some saying, probably around the time of Christ. But here's the thing. What they did is not actually measuring age directly. It's comparing patterns, and lots of stuff can mess with those patterns. Fires and storage conditions, or starches. Various treatments that were really common in the Middle Ages. And we do know that the shroud itself survived two fires, which would obviously have affected the fiber composition quite greatly. Even weaving styles repeat across centuries, so, while the X-ray test is creative, and I think it definitely has its merits in certain areas, it's definitely not as solid as carbon dating. And you also got to realize, too, that they tested the same exact corner as the radiocarbon dating corner. So it doesn't make sense why they would get a different date than the carbon dating if they did the exact same corner. Carbon dating is pretty accurate, and so we can also go, if we also look into scripture, we get a little bit of a clue here too. So John says, I don't remember the chapter and verse, maybe John 10. I don't remember off the top of my head. But John says there were two cloths in the tomb, the main linen wrappings and a separate napkin for the head. If some kind of miraculous burst of energy did really imprint an image on the shroud, you'd expect to at least see some sort of semblance of an outline or something, where the napkin was set, whether it was up above or below the cloth. It wouldn't matter. You would see that either way, but we don't. When we look at the shroud, there's nothing. There's no indication of another cloth. So that doesn't line up with the biblical account, which definitely is something we should take into consideration. So here's where I land. The history says the shroud shows up in the 1300s. The carbon dating, says the same thing. And while carbon dating does have its weaknesses and its flaws, it's pretty darn accurate. To at least the time of Christ. I mean, some say it's accurate up to like 50,000 years or something. I don't think I would agree with that necessarily, but at least 2,000 years, you can probably be pretty sure that carbon dating is pretty accurate. The newer fiber test, I mean, it sounded cool. at first, but really when you start digging in and looking at what they did, it really doesn't have legs. And the Bible itself doesn't describe what we see in the shroud. So you put it all together, and it really looks like um, a medieval creation to me. And honestly, that's fine. My faith doesn't rest on a piece of linen. If it turned out to be real, cool. If it's a medieval creation, also fine. Whatever. The reality of the resurrection doesn't depend on a relic. It depends on Christ, and that's enough for me. But a better question, in my opinion, is if the shroud is fake, why was it created? And this is where a little history really helps. You see, in the 13th and 14th centuries, there was a whole trade that cropped up of people making fortunes by producing so-called sacred relics and trinkets. These relics of the saints, nails from the cross, or even bits or slivers of the true cross itself. There was even, vials of Mary's milk. Ugh, like, why? What? Why? But people were into this kind of thing, and if you wanted it, somebody was selling it. Pilgrims would pay, churches would pay, and towns would compete for prestige over holding these sacred relics and items. And a lot of times they even believed that they held certain powers that would help them, in battles and things like that. So there's all sorts of fun stuff if you dig into the history about this. And this is where we remember, that the love of money is and always has been one of the strongest motivators in history, and is the root of all evil. So it's not hard to see that the shroud, its creation was probably wasn't for anything spiritual or faith based. Wasn't probably for any kind of control or anything like that. It was probably just something, like a lucrative venture by someone looking to cash in and capitalize on this culture that had grown up. And I'm not the only one that sees it this way too. In the early 1600s, the German mystic, Jacob Boehme, in the preface to his book Aurora, he actually talks about this exact thing. He describes a merchant spirit that had arisen in the church, basically a counterfeit economy where, instead of um, seeking God, people brought in and sold religion. Basically, it's priestcraft at its finest, and so faith was turned into a marketplace. Uh, and Jacob Boehme warned that this merchant spirit would one day face God's judgment, and that it would fall just like Babylon in Revelation, um, because it corrupted what was meant to be holy. Um, and even Christ himself foreshadowed this when he overturned the tables of the money changers in the temple. That wasn't just about the one moment in Jerusalem. It was a type, a shadow of what was to come, a warning that God would not tolerate his house being turned into a house of merchandise. And so, I think the shroud, if it's fake, fits right into that same pattern. Of course, it could have been created for more nefarious purposes. I can't say with certainty. But to me, it was most likely a medieval creation. Could I be wrong? Sure, I could. But I've definitely looked in this quite deeply, and the evidence doesn't support it being the actual burial cloth of Christ. Um, so yeah, I hope that this helped a little bit with understanding the Shroud of Turin. Thank you all for watching my videos. They're continuing to do great, and I'm loving doing this. I'm loving putting out lessons and sharing them with friends and family. Um, don't forget to like and share, get it out there so that we can get these messages out to more people that maybe are looking for truth and aren't sure, exactly how to sift through all the chaos in the world. And I want to thank God for giving me these opportunities and giving me the knowledge and wisdom to help teach you guys. Um, I love digging into stuff like this. So if there's anything that you are curious about and you want to know, drop it in the comments, and I'll look into it. So other than that, yeah, you guys have a great day. I'll see you next time.